Good morning, my dear students. We are learning a prose, and the name of the prose is The Portrait of a Lady. And the prose is written by Kushwant Singh. Kushwant Singh is the writer of this prose. So, here he is describing about his grandmother. Till yesterday, we learned that when the author Kushwant Singh decided to go abroad for further studies, at the time his grandmother was upset, and his grandmother was so my dear students, the author was sure that his grandmother would be upset, as because the author is going abroad for his further studies, but it was not really happened. Her grandmother came to leave him at the railway station, but he did not talk or show any emotional feelings towards him. His grandmother's lips moved in fear, and silently the grandmother kissed his forehead. And when the author lived, the author cherished that this would be the last imprint, as perhaps the last sign of physical contact with his grandmother. But that was not so. After 5 years, I came back home and was met by her at the station. She did not look a day older. She still had no time for words, and while she clasped me in her arms, I could hear her reciting her prayers. Even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer and with frivolous rebukes. So, my dear students, the author thought that would be the last physical contact with his grandmother, as it happens at this type of essay, because the author has been known his grandmother for 20 years back, as when he was a child. So after becoming older, he has seen his grandmother in the same position. So when he went abroad for 5 years for further studies, thinking himself that this would be the last eye to eye contact, last physical contact with his grandmother. But that was not so. After 5 years, when the author came back home from his further studies from abroad, and the author met his grandmother at the railway station, and the grandmother did not look a day older. She was looking at the same age. She still had no time for words. So at that time also, after 5 years, the grandmother did not have time to waste. And while the author's grandmother clasped him in her arms, at the time also the author could hear the reciting and the prayers, hear her reciting her prayers. Even on the first day of the author's arrival, the grandmother's happiest moment were with her sparrows, whom the grandmother fed longer and with frivolous rebuke, with inappropriate manner. So, in appropriate manner, the author's grandmother were feeding the sparrows for a long time. In the evening, a sense came over her. So, in the evening, what happened? A sense came over the grandmother. she did not pray. In the evening, she did not pray. The grandmother did not pray. She collected the women of the neighborhood. So she called for the women of the neighborhood and got an old drum, and she got an old drum and started to sing, and she, the grandmother, started to sing after collecting the old drum, and after calling the women of the neighborhood, she started singing. For several hours she thumped the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum and sang of the homecoming warriors. So after for several hours, the grandmother hit the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum of the not good condition drum. The for several hours he was she was hitting the sagging skins of the old drum, dilapidated drum. The drum was in a ruined condition and sang of the homecoming warriors, and the grandmother sang the song of homecoming warriors all the day. We had to proceed. So the author and his family member had to persuade her to stop, to avoid overstraining. So after that, the authors and the family members convinced his grandmother, to stop for singing or to stop for hitting the dilapidated drum, as because it will be overstraining, it will be subject to the excessive demand on strength and or abilities, as because it will cost the energy of the grandmother. That was the first time since I had known her, and that she did not pray. So that was the first time that the author had known his grandmother, that she did not pray. The next morning she was taken ill. So after in the next morning she was taken ill. It was a mild fever, and the doctor told us that it could go. So it was simply a mild fever, and the doctor also told the author and his family member that the mild fever will go. But my grandmother thought differently. Took it differently. She told us that her end was near. So the grandmother told them that her end is near. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the last chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray. So after that she told that since only a few hours is left for closing the last chapter of the grandmother's life, she wanted to perform the prayer, and she had omitted failed to perform or to leave out the prayer. She was not going to waste any more time talking to us. So after that, the grandmother told that as her days is near, her last chapter of her life is near. So he spent a time, wasted a time of not praying. So now she did not want to waste any more time with talking with the family members of the author. At the time, what happened? We protested, the authors and the family members protested the grandmother, but she ignored the protest. She lay peacefully in bed, praying and telling her kids. She lay peacefully in the bed in the bed and praying and telling her beads of the rosary even before we could up suspect. So even before the authors could suspect that his grandmother lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. So after that, the author's grandmother's lips stopped moving and the rosary fell down from the lifeless fingers of the grandmother. A pallor, a peaceful pallor, a peaceful paleness split on her face, and we knew that she was dead. So a peaceful paleness split on her face, and the authors and the family members of the author knew that the grandmother was dead. We lifted her off the bed, and as is customary, so the author lifted the dead body of the grandmother off from the bed, and as is customary, laid her on the ground and covered her with a red shroud. And the grandmother was laid on the ground and covered. The grandmother was covered with a red cloth. After a few hours of mourning, so after a few hours of mourning, the authors and his family member left her alone to make arrangement for her funeral. So after some time, after few hours, the author left alone the grandmother, and as because they have to make arrangement for her funeral. In the evening, we went to her room with a crude stretcher to take her to the cremated. So in the evening, the authors and his family member went to the room of the grandmother with a crude stretcher to take the grandmother to be cremated. The sun was setting and had lighted her room and veranda with a blaze of golden light. At the time the sun was setting and had lighted the grandmother's room and the veranda also with a blaze of golden light, with a fire of golden light. We stopped halfway in the courtyard. So the authors stopped halfway in the courtyard, all over the veranda, and in her right she lay dead, wrapped in the red. Thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. So thousands of sparrows were sat scattered on the floor where the author's grandmother was laid. There was no chirping. At the time there was no chirping, no sound of the sparrows, though there were thousands of sparrows. We felt sorry for the birds. The author and his family member felt sorry for the birds, and his grandmother baked some bread for them, and my mother baked some bread for them. So after that, the mother of the author spread some bread for the sparrows. She broke into little crumbs. The author's grandmother broke the bread into little crumbs, the way my grandmother used to do. In the way the grandmother used to do to feed the sparrows, and threw it to them. And the author's grandmother threw the breads to the sparrows. But the sparrows took no notice of the bread. But the sparrows took no notice of the breads. When we carried my grandmother's corpse off, when the authors and the family member carried the grandmother's dead body off from the room, from the veranda, they flew away quietly. After that, the sparrows flew away silently. Next morning, the sweeper swept the bread crumbs into the dustbin. So, in the next morning, the sweeper swept the bread crumbs into the dustbin. That means the sparrows did not take the breads which was given to them by the author's mother. So this is the end of the story, the portrait of a lady. My dear students, I hope you understand the short story. You go through the story and read the story thoroughly once again for understanding. So in my next class, I will give you I will try to solve the textual question for you. This is all for today, my dear students. Thank you. Stay at home, stay safe, have a good day. Bye bye.